All right, everyone. Good morning again. You know what I like to do when we're about to start the event? Ask you to give a big round of applause so everyone hears that something is going on. So please, big round of applause. That's a signal for everybody lingering outside that we're about to start. So many of you, I think, were just in the last session with Dion Brand, and we are just going from amazing event to amazing event, because this session this morning, Quarrelling with History, for me is certainly a festival highlight, given the caliber of the four people on stage. I'm going to hand over very quickly to Alissa Trotz, who is the host and moderator of this event. Alissa, as many of you know, is a scholar, an activist. She's particularly dear to me as the person who edited the collected writings of Andaye, the Guyanese activist, one of my favorite books of all time because of what it is and what it does. And she's going to very ably run this conversation. But before we begin, I just wanted to say, well, first two things, just on a practical note. It took a while to settle you all down after the last event, so we are starting a bit late. The good news is we built in a little extra time at lunchtime, so we're not going to cheat you of any time. We'll have the full conversation. The second thing is just to say something very briefly about the title of the panel, and I'm wearing my T-shirt. I hope you all see. And I'm sure some in the audience, in particular the literary scholars, maybe of a certain age, will recognize the reference, which is to a famous essay by the Jamaican scholar and poet Edward Bohr, Professor Edward Bohr, or Eddie, as everyone knew him, who was a writer who came to the festival several times. And in the 1970s, he wrote an essay called The West Indian Writer and His Quarrel with History. Note the pronoun. Eddie did say many decades later that if he, the pronoun at the time, which he meant to be a neutral pronoun, but as we know, no language is neutral, he said that if he were writing or publishing that essay now, it could not and would not be the West Indian writer and his quarrel with history. Let's leave that aside. When I thought of this combination of writers and the kinds of questions and issues that this conversation could cover, that phrase, quarrelling with history, just kept coming back to me, because in a lot of ways that's what all of our festival writers are doing, however you define history and however you define a quarrel. So I just wanted, as we started, to say that Eddie died last December. He was stood on this festival stage, has read his poems from the stage where I'm standing now, so I did want to just mention him, pay tribute to him, and say that maybe the version of quarrelling with history that I have in mind is not exactly what he meant in his essay, and I'm sure some of the scholars in the audience would be happy to argue that with me. But I leave it in the hands of Alissa, Myriam, Karen, and Christina to interpret that as they will, and this is going to be an incredibly rich conversation, and I'm now going to get off the stage, get out of the way so they can begin. So please welcome them again, and let's begin.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. It's a real pleasure to be here. I was frowning because when you mentioned Eddie Bohr, that's such a perfect way to begin. And in fact, this morning I was in a conversation with the historian Bridget Brereton, and I was saying these things have a way of bringing us together, but I've seen you online somewhere and I can't figure out where. And Bridget, it was at the online service for Eddie Bohr. So, okay, so I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then if you will permit me, I would like to spend a few minutes just sort of framing some of the larger questions. This was a remarkable panel this morning with Dion and Shivani, and I think we're going to actually be retreading some similar ground in this conversation today. So Christina Sharpe is a writer, professor, and Canada Research Chair in Black Studies in the Humanities at York University in Toronto. She is the author of 3 books, most recently Ordinary Notes, which was the winner of the Hillary Weston Writers Trust in Nonfiction and finalist for the National Book Award in Nonfiction, the National Book Critics Circle Award in Nonfiction, and the James Tate Black Prize in Biography. In April of this year, so recently, Christina was awarded a Wyndham Campbell Prize in Nonfiction and was named a Guggenheim Fellow. Karen Lord is an award-winning writer of speculative fiction, whose works include The Best of All Possible Worlds and The Galaxy Game, and the crime fantasy novel Unraveling. Most recently, she is the author of The Blue Beautiful World, longlisted for the 2024 Women's Prize for Fiction. And Myriam J.A. Chancy is a writer. Myriam J. Chancy is a writer and the Hartley Byrne Alexander Chair of Humanities at Scripps College, California. She is the author of several award-winning books, including Harvesting Haiti, which was longlisted for the 2024 OCM Bocas Prize, and her latest novel is Village Weavers. So the description for the panel today asks two questions. How are conflicts and tensions of the present rooted in injustices of the past? And what is the work of the creative imagination in envisioning better and more just futures? To be sure, it feels difficult, if not impossible, to hold on to that second question in the face of the violence of global capitalism, white supremacy, and rising fascism that we face in the present. We inhabit a world in which a genocide is playing out in real time in Gaza, and I'm grateful to Dion for bringing that into the room this morning. 7 months after the October 7th Hamas attacks that killed 1,200 Israelis and other nationals, at least 35,000 Palestinians have been killed, mostly women and children, and close to 2 million are once again displaced by an ethno-nationalist project founded 76 years ago on Palestinian dispossession. And we see the weaponization of anti-Semitism to elide the diversity of Jewish opinion and shut down any criticism of the state of Israel and its murderous apartheid logics. A few weeks ago also marked the first anniversary of the most recent civil war in Sudan, where the internal displacement, close to 11 million people, is the largest in the world, and yet this does not even make the mainstream news. Right here in our region, the struggles waged by the Haitian people for self-determination since the 18th century, a debt that we all owe to Haiti, continue to be subverted, including, and we must say this, by our Caribbean leaders, extending to their blatant and ongoing refusal to allow freedom of movement for Haitians across the Caribbean, and our complicity as Caribbean people in this ongoing exclusion. And right around our world, the devastating ecological effects of colonialism and imperialism reveal themselves each day. Right here in Tobago, with the most recent oil spill, up to now, we can't figure out who the tug or the boat belonged to. And this in a region where extractivism is still proudly the order of the day. But it is precisely because of this world on fire that we need the creative imagination. In one of your notes, Christina, you refer to imagination as, quote, the internal engine of Black life. We must refuse to be silent. As Dion said this morning, nothing will come of our innocence. We must ensure we keep making connections, like the Palestinian poet Rifat Alirar, murdered by an Israeli airstrike in December 2023, 1 month after he shared a poem, If I Must Die, that connected him to Claude McKay's If We Must Die, across time and space, from Palestine to Harlem to Jamaica. And this morning, we woke up to the news that yesterday, while we were at this festival, Alirar's daughter, Shema, and grandchild were killed, also by an Israeli airstrike on their homes. Alirar ended his poem, If I Must Die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. That tale is our imagination and refusal. That tale is the university student encampment spreading like wildfire across the United States, refusing the Palestine exception. That tale is the young student camped out at Columbia University, the niece of the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, murdered by the Israeli army 2 years ago. In selecting their opening readings, I've invited our guests to reflect on Kamau Brafitt's imperative, art must come out of catastrophe. And I thank the Bahamian poet Christian Campbell for putting that quote back on my radar during the early days of COVID. Art must come out of catastrophe. And the prompt that I've asked our guests to sit with as they come up to share their first excerpts with you is, what do catastrophe and art mean to you? And how do you story this in your work? So we'll begin with, well, Christina, then Karen, and then either.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so it's on now. Okay, I'm gonna stay here. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, and it's such a pleasure and an honor to be on a panel with both of you, all of you. I'm going to read 4 notes. Note 1. There are all kinds of ordinary notes. There are unreservedly anti-Black notes. There are notes that attempt but fail to undo anti-Black logics. Then there are notes that refuse altogether to accede to those logics that simultaneously re, and unhuman Black people. These Black notes may land in silence or a tone, a sound, a pitch, a record, or an observation made with care. These notes might just reach you across distance, time, and space, and with them you may be held and held. Note 98, The Black Men in the Square, Venice, Campo Santa Margherita. June 12th, 2019, 5:53 p.m. It was late afternoon on a hot and humid Venice day. The 3 of us were walking through the Campo Santa Margherita when we saw him. He was shirtless and kneeling on a raised platform like a pedestal or a cistern. He was wearing only shorts and he was holding something in his mouth. I've called them shorts, but they were more like swim trunks, brown, blousy, and very short, with a string at the waist tied into a bow. In the center of the raised platform that he knelt on was a metal grate, and in his mouth was a partially eaten browning banana. We were stunned at his appearance there. We stopped and looked at him. We looked at each other. We were concerned. We were more than concerned. We were alarmed. That grate he knelt on would have absorbed all of the day's heat, and his knees were unprotected. He was unprotected. We wanted to shield him. We gestured at him. We almost ran toward him. We asked him, "Are you okay? Is this a protest?" We asked him frantically. We stood there and looked at him until he met and briefly held our eyes. He met our eyes in order to reassure us. He looked so pained. I did not know what this kindness had cost him. He gave us a single, almost imperceptible nod, and then he returned to his concentration. He returned to the discipline and attention of his terrible ritual. I swore afterwards that I had seen him there 2 years before, but Dee said no. I tell C that when I saw him kneeling on that hot grate, it is as if I see him there always. June 12th, 2019, 4:30 p.m. Earlier in the day on Calle Contarina, Corfu, we met a man who hailed us. "Sister," he said, "I am in hell." Note 99. Between verticality and the subterranean, quote, "You may die a brutal death, the brutality being the happenstance." And those 2 lines are from a poem by Assia Wadoud called Syncope, a very beautiful poem that I really recommend that you all look for. It was published by Ugly Duckling Press in 2019. My final note is note 169, Tender. When Claudia Tate interviewed Gail Jones for Black American Literature Forum, she asked her, "Do you have any theories about the human condition which you dramatize in your work?" To which Jones replied, quote, "I think that what comes out in my work, in those particular novels, Corregidora and Eva's Man, is an emphasis on brutality. But I think something else is also suggested in them, namely the alternative to brutality, which is tenderness. Although the main focus is on the blues relationship or relationships involving brutality, there seems to be a growing understanding working itself out, particularly in Corregidora, of what is required in order to be genuinely tender. Perhaps brutality enables one to recognize what tenderness is," end quote. Tender. The girl who wrote on the chalkboard. The boy who was carrying Skittles and iced tea. The girl who was by herself and surrounded by hate. The young woman who was asleep in her bed. The young man who cried for his mother. The young woman who drove the wrong way and the baby girl who survived this. The man who cried for his mother. The girl who took the video of the man who cried for his mother. The other girl, the cousin of the first girl, who also witnessed this. The boy who was skipping away. the woman convulsed with mourning, and the woman who warned them not to take her picture. The girl who told her mother that she would take care of her. The boy who had only just arrived at the gazebo to play. The girl who was sound asleep in her grandmother's living room. The girl to whose forehead someone taped the word ship. The woman who questioned why she was being stopped. The woman pulled over with her 3 young children in the car. The woman who knocked on a door and asked for help. The boy who was walking down the street. The woman whose 2 little sons were swept away in a flood, the door to their safety barred. The man who was running down the street. The boy who was playing music in his car with his friends. The boy whose mother was anxious when he did not return home. The woman who fell. The girl who called for help. The man who yelled, "Mom, Mom!" The man who said, "I can't breathe." The boy accused of shoplifting and his mother whose heart was broken. The children who held a press conference in English and said, "We want to live." The man who said, "I'm scared." The boy who asked, "Am I dead?" The girls, sisters whose bones became lessons. The girl who emerged from the rubble and asked, "Are you taking me to the cemetery?" The girl who said, "I am a child."
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I feel as if it's always a challenge, but a delight to follow after such a strong reading as that. And I would like to point out that what I'm about to read is taken out of a context that is a lot larger, and I don't have time to explain it to you. But I do want to say that speculative fiction has a particular style which I call sociological fiction. Sociological fiction looking at the individual within their community and the historical context that has created the environment in which they are making their choices and living their lives. So we are always in a quarrel with history because we look at what has gone before and we deconstruct it and we build something which is new and unbelievable, and we ask you to look at our present realities through this new filter. What I'm presenting to you is a possible future, a possible nearish future. And when I wrote it, I thought it was fairly far into the future. And then that summer, it was very hot in Europe. The last year was very hot in Europe in summer, just before this book was published, and 2 years after I'd written this scene. In Amsterdam, since the population collapse of the 2070s, it was possible to book not merely a suite of rooms, but a plot of land, complete with environmentally appropriate, low-impact dwellings and offices, security points included, and bordered by a grid of canals in a moat-like manner that was both aesthetically pleasing and slightly isolating. The walk between the cabins was short, but uncomfortable. The Netherlands was suffering from a summer heat spike, and everyone was either staying in during peak sun hours or huddling near the massive misting fans installed by civic administration along the banks of the canals. Tarek found this setup primitive, not because of its low level of technology, but because of the sense of too rapid change, evolution without consolidation. This city was no longer building on the foundations of an irretrievable past, but scrambling to keep ahead of the razor-sharp blade of a future that promised death to the unprepared. The climate had shifted. The design of older buildings was obsolete, and the city was trying to adapt with the ponderous speed of a battleship trying to change course. During his earlier travels, Tarek had seen a little of Amsterdam and a lot of the cities on the other continents. Some places were more stable than others, but many of the once prosperous states of the Northern Hemisphere exuded desperation of various types and flavors. There was the desperation of a rich man in a mansion trying to enjoy the last of the party before the bill collectors broke down his door. There was the frantic virtue of a criminal turned monk flagellating himself in vigorous but useless penance. Most of all, there was the manic optimism of incompetent politicians, assuring their public that the measures being employed were not at all too little and too late, and begging them not to erect the guillotines just yet. He knew his history, and this present had a familiar echo. Old empires were slowly falling. New orders were struggling to become established. Here, the new factor was the reach of it. This was not a single city left to be sacked, burned, and left to crumble to ruin, nor a mere country decimated and taken over by wildflowers and beasts amid the lingering threat of live minefields and unspent chemical shells. This was the whole basket overturned, all the eggs smashed, all the hopes crushed. Humankind had lived for 2 centuries with the ability to self-immolate utterly and a tendency to play with matches. It was only a matter of time before they followed through on that somber promise. No malice aforethought needed. Something, error, neglect, or the unpredictable and unprecedented, might easily tip the balance against them. The entire planet was at a tipping point, ripe for salvation or destruction, angels of deliverance or barbarians. And in the meantime, bread and circuses made life bearable and occasionally diverting. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to stand to read. It's just a little easier for flow. I'm really happy to have been invited to be with my co-panelists this morning, and Alissa for a wonderful introduction. I'm going to read from an essay in Harvesting Haiti, which was invited by Suniti Marahaj for the Trinidad and Tobago Review, or Express, I think, when it was still in print, and you'll see the relationship to Trinidad. It sounds good to me. Independence notes are what's so great about being Haitian, anyway. When I first arrived at Piarco International Airport in Trinidad, it was to be greeted with a banner announcing to visitors the Golden Jubilee celebration of Trinidad and Tobago's independence. A quick calculation revealed that TNT had been independent since the summer of 1962, when the British Union Jack was replaced with a black, red, and white flag of a new nation. A young nation, I thought, thinking of Haiti, thinking as a Haitian. I wondered what this difference in years could make as a few months later, I observed celebrations for the 4th of July in the United States. Surprisingly, that year, this is 2012, there was a great deal more open conversation about the controversial aspects of American independence. And Frederick Douglass's speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," circulated liberally. The speech was delivered 76 years after the signing in 1776 of the Declaration of Independence, July 5, 1852. 2 years after the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act, prompting Douglass to write, quote, "For black men, there are neither law, justice, humanity, nor religion," and 11 years before the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was to finally abolish slavery in the United States. But we are years away from 1852 and slavery, you might say. What does any of this have to do with us, Caribbean people and Caribbean nations? When Douglass made his speech in 1852, he was well aware of another history in the Americas. ignored by the pundits of his time. He was well aware that the United States that he spoke of had not existed geographically when the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. These United States had come to be in 1803 when Napoleon Bonaparte, defeated by the quote-unquote Black Jacobins of Saint-Domingue, had to sell to then President Thomas Jefferson a swath of land measuring 828,000 square miles stretching from the Gulf Coast of Louisiana to the Northwest, about a third of the present-day United States, in order to survive the economic devastation of a war. Honestly, everyone has forgotten this footnote in history. January 1st, 1804, Saint-Domingue renamed itself Haiti, stripping itself of its colonial name and removing the white banner of the French flag from the newly created Haitian drapeau to represent the removal of French domination. There were no slaves in the new nation. For formerly enslaved Africans, free-coloreds, defectors from the French army, including Poles and others, had fought for the freedom of the nation in the name of freedom itself. Some 40 years after his "What to the Slave is the 4th of July" speech, Douglass would serve as American Consul General to Haiti from 1891 to 1893. So, what does this have to do with Trinidad and Tobago and the independence celebrations? I'd like to suggest that what has been forgotten are the Pan-African dimensions of rebellions and resistance movements across Caribbean states, and that we don't know enough about each other's histories to truly understand the losses and gains of our ancestors, their great sacrifices, even when they were not successful. But in all of this, more greatly forgotten than most are the Haitians and the cost of their struggle for freedom. Aimé Césaire, who coined the term négritude and founded the movement with Léopold Senghor, recognized Haiti as a precursor and model for revolutionary thought and action when he wrote in Cahiers, Return to My Native Land of 1956, the seminal line, Haïti, où la négritude se mit debout pour la première fois et dit qu'elle croyait à son humanité. Haiti, where négritude stood up for the first time and said it believed in its humanity. Before Césaire, there was the work of Haitian anthropologist Jean Price-Mars in his So Spoke the Uncle of 1928, published approximately 6 years before C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobins, but not translated until the 1990s. But Price-Mars was well known to African-descended intellectuals of the region and period transnationally. In turn, Price-Mars's foundational arguments were derived from the work of Haitian anthropologist Anténor Firmin, the first known anthropologist of African descent, who presented to the Paris Anthropological Society in 1885, in the presence and mockery of contemporaries, his essay De l'égalité des races humaines, of the equality of human races. Embraced in contrast by Haitian and African intellectuals through whom his ideas continued to survive and circulate from one generation to the next, Firmin's views were not popular with the mulatto elite since they heralded the equality of the underclasses, but he was respected and appointed to the post of Haitian Minister of Foreign Affairs to Paris, both to acknowledge his stature and to remove him from local influence. This position may have had a role in spreading Firmin's reach, more so than is presently acknowledged, since it is known that he attended the first Pan-African Congress in London of 1900, which was also attended by an equally important political and literary figure in the Americas, W.E.B. Du Bois, author of The Souls of Black Folk, whose grandfather was also Haitian. Haiti's earthquake has occasioned a new opening, sometimes uncomfortable, but nonetheless an ironic opportunity to rediscover and reassess important milestones in our discrete as well as shared histories, to take stock of all of that our ancestors struggled for and against, and to weigh their successes not by the measure of their wealth, but by the health of our cultural complexities and uniqueness. By this measure, Haiti is richer than surface appearance suggests and deserving of consideration and examination, not as a pauper, but as an equal in the kingdom. Thank you.
That was a wonderful start. Ooh, thank you so much. I'm going to ask a question for one of you to begin, and then the others as well. So I'm going to begin with Myriam. the aftermath of the devastating earthquake in 2010 in Haiti. I'm going a little slowly. I scribe, and it looks like that. You say that through writing, you literally regained your voice. And Christina, you detail what you describe as, quote, the everyday sonic and haptic vocabularies of living life under these brutal regimes, end quote, marked by the global afterlives of slavery. And you gave us a devastating example in note 99 that you just read. And Karen, I felt like with your incredible book, it was a wake-up call of sorts, where you, in what you just read, you talked about this, quote, future that promised death to the unprepared. And a wake-up call that is coming from a region, the Caribbean, of low-lying coasts and small island developing states that are among the most vulnerable to the devastating effects of climate colonialism. For all of you, starting with Myriam, what does it mean to write in this conjuncture? In an interview, Jackie, that you did with Gina Ulysses, you asked, who are you? Why did you come? And are you doing the work you came here to do? Is it as witness or as scribe? Is it as responsibility or imperative in the face of the willed illiteracy that, you know, if it wasn't for the Haitian Revolution, we would not have had the United States in the way that it looks without the Louisiana Purchase, in the face of history with a capital H, in which, as Dion said this morning, the wars they recorded were the wars they won? Is it as an act of interruption, insubordination, insurrection, or is it as care?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's all of those things, but it is not necessarily my first impulse. And when you cited what I wrote in the introduction of Harvesting Haiti, so Harvesting Haiti, for those of you who don't know, is a collection of essays that I wrote and published from 2011 to 2014, including a photo essay that was not intended for publication of images that I took in Port-au-Prince after returning after the earthquake. And the introduction and conclusion bring you up to date to 2022. But what I reflected on in that introduction was the fact that, in fact, writing was not my first impulse after the earthquake, though I was called upon to give a lot of talks about, you know, what it meant to care for Haiti or to be an ally to Haiti if you're not Haitian. So I was really talking in those essays polemically about the political situation, about best practices when there's a devastation of this kind that is both natural and man-made, to be clear, because 300,000 people don't disappear in 46 seconds simply because of a natural disaster that swallows them up. So what happened for me, though, is that I was unable, or I was prevented from doing the things I needed to do in the aftermath of the earthquake. One of those things is grieving, because I lost a number of colleagues, family members, and so on. And often I was being called upon to speak on the earthquake, but people not wanting to hear what I actually wanted to say. And what happened is I lost my voice, like literally, I lost my voice. And this happens to me occasionally. I just, it's like a chakra thing. I just lost my voice for a couple of weeks, which allowed me to decide what it is I needed to do. And the first impulse was not writing. The first impulse was, what do people need on the ground? I was called upon to track people down, which also meant that I came across a lot of the dead. So I remember, some of you may know the writer Evelyne Trouillot. Somebody from Puerto Rico asked me to track down a student at her university, l'Université de l'État, and I had 4 or 5 contacts for that student, and I gave him to Evelyne on Facebook, which, this is when Facebook was starting, for those of you who remember when Facebook started, and that was the only thing working for communications. I sent Evelyne a note, and I said, is this student alive? And 2 days later, the message came back, the student is alive, but all your contacts are dead. And then I had to talk to my colleague with the good news and bad news. And I remember thinking, okay, you have to steel yourself because this is the work. That was the work. The work was taking on the responsibility of communicating, of connecting people, and then going on the road, giving talks. And I gave talks every couple of weeks for 3 to 6 months, and then that stretched into 3 years. And I didn't consider those writings per se, or art, or my work. I considered them a responsibility. And then as I realized that these things were disappearing, because many of these op-eds appeared in things like the Express that had disappeared from circulation or online. But I was still being asked in 2022 the same questions. What is wrong with Haiti? What's so great about being Haitian? Why should we care? What's wrong with Haiti? And my response is always, well, what's wrong, with the questioner? But they don't know what the history is, and that's why I collected the essays and went on from there, which is different from my work in creative writing, which I can talk about tomorrow.
That's a rich, beautiful question that you asked us, and Myriam's answer that it's kind of all those things is deeply correct. But I would like to add in your example what I was going to say, that what you almost demonstrated is that everything is seasonal. You have to react to what is necessary for the moment. So yes, there's a balance between theory and praxis, activism and self-care, knowing what is supposed to be given in the moment. I only want to give like a couple of examples. For me, my awakening, as it were, came through sort of three points. One was just before the pandemic, I was commissioned to contribute to an anthology on the future of health. And because it was a rush, because I was a last-minute fill-in, I said, I'll go with a common trope of science fiction. I'll write about a pandemic. So I wrote a story called The Plague Doctors in the middle of 2019. And by the time the anthology was published in 2020, COVID was already with us. It was specifically a story about a pandemic happening, and the protagonist is in a small island and has to deal with that. And I got the chance to see over the pandemic how the things I wrote about unfolded in real life. But it wasn't really prophecy, because I had researched my history. I had a friend who's a doctor, and I asked very deep questions about the whole biological and medical basis behind certain things. We took huge care with the illustrations. We had a marvelous set of illustrators. How the PPE looked, the mask and everything like that. His first version wasn't quite right, and we said, no, get this right. And then all of a sudden it became hugely important that it was right, because everybody knows what it's supposed to look like now. So that was one thing. The other thing was, during the pandemic, I was trying to work on something. And I had a really stressful time, because it seemed as if world events kept mirroring what I was writing about. So my protagonist was being attacked. Protagonist is a man of color, and then the Black Lives Matter, marches and so on started happening. I had to put the manuscript down, and then another thing happened with an echo, and then the final thing that was with an echo, I had to write about a firebombing in my plot, and Soufriere erupted near to us, and we had ashfall. We had literally noontime going to nighttime. And a lot of us were just like, this is a completely new experience for us. Yeah. But the thing that happened, and this is the third point now, that really awakened to me what we do and why it's important, and what maybe a prophet is. A prophet doesn't just talk about the future. A prophet talks about truth, whether that truth is future, present, or past. And we had a press conference in Barbados right after the whole weekend of ashfall, because obviously it has to get moved. And at the end of the press conference, they chose a poem by Kamau Brathwaite called The Dust, which was read on video. It was actually from the Kamau Brathwaite Remix Engine. They'd done a month of his readings. And they chose that one. And The Dust is a poem about the eruption in 1906, and how a woman is reminiscing about it. And of course, this is an era before satellites, before communications, and this would have just been pure apocalypse descending with no explanation. The moment I heard that poem being read, I felt deeply affirmed in what I do. I had varied between, oh, this is a very trivial job, and to, oh no, this is very important, or maybe it's just important to me. And then suddenly I was like, this is the communication between generations. This is the past telling me, we've been through this, we got through this, we were okay, you will be okay too. That's what poetry does for us, that's what fiction does for us, that's what any written record does for us. And in that moment, it completely changed how I viewed my work as a writer, and also reassured me that I was going in the right direction. Thanks.
first I want to thank you both for your beautiful readings. And the way that you ended, Myriam, it made me think about the panel before and Dion talking about the door of no return, both, of course, as catastrophe, but also a kind of provocation to imagining and the kind of leap that one had to make to survive it. So you ended the reading by talking about the earthquake as both catastrophe and something else. And then because, Alissa, you had given us the prompt, I was thinking about when Brathwaite says, for me, the history of catastrophe requires a literature of catastrophe to hold a broken mirror up to a broken nature. And so thinking about, so my answer to your wonderful question is, I think some combination of all of them. And I was thinking also something that Myriam said, the kind of repetition to always be asked, what is wrong with Haiti? Which we could then extend to say, what is wrong with Black people? And so when I was writing Ordinary Notes, I was thinking, I wanted to write a book that enacted something formally, but also really spoke to the ordinary extraordinariness of Black life, the ways in which we make something in the midst of all kinds of pressures that would unmake us. And so Ordinary Notes is kind of an answer to what is wrong with Black people, which is, that's the wrong question. And so I wanted to think with this book about, so there's a sentence that I repeat 3 times in the book before this, which was In the Wake on Blackness and Being, which is something like this. We Black people have been constituted through and by overwhelming force, but we are not known only to ourselves and to each other by that force. There's something else that we might call regard, which is that how we see each other. And I wanted Ordinary Notes to be a kind of record and performance of that seeing. So I think it is both witnessing, condemning, trying to open up and hold space and recognize the ways that we experience violence, but we don't only live in violence and as a result of violence. And also there's a section of the book called Preliminary Entries Toward a Dictionary of Untranslatable Blackness, in which I wanted to think that both give us, but also record a vocabulary of how we live in the world in the face of everything that we face, which is a kind of drive by capital, by the people who govern us, toward death, and the ways in which we resist that. I also want to thank Alissa and to thank Shivani and Dion before us for bringing Gaza to stop all kinds of genocides and catastrophes. So I really want to thank you for that as well. And I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. Y'all rail hard, because y'all make me throw away half my questions because you answering everything today on the page here. I don't really know what to ask next. Okay, so so scratch 2 questions that I had because y'all more or less answered it. This is terrible. Christina, I wondered if you could elaborate on, people always wonder how you come up with titles. And it seems to me that in all of your titles, there's this, I'm extemporizing here, anticipating the panel this afternoon, in all of your titles, there is this kind of double-edged, double-sided sort of grammar. And I wanted you began to speak about this, but I wondered if you could speak specifically to the ordinary, Karen, if you could speak to the blue, and Myriam, if you could speak to the vocabulary of harvesting. So in this order.
Thank you. Great question. I could speak to the ordinary because I was really interested in, the ways that it is very clear to me as a Black person, and I think, that we have much to say and think about the world in which we are forced to inhabit and try to make in different ways. So I really wanted to think about those kinds of ordinary, everyday, kind of quotidian both joys and violences, and how we mark them and they mark us and what we do with them. And so I was very interested in the kind of materials of Black life and the kinds of theories and praxes that Black people have to survive and to make something else. I mean, Dionne Brand has told us that history is already in the chair, in the empty room when we arrive. What do we do with that history? How do we confront it? How does it mark us? How do we keep and unkeep it? So that's the kind of ordinary. And then in relation to note, thinking about all of the varieties of note. I know you didn't ask me about note, but just, all of the meanings of note, from music to taking down, to marking things. So I wanted to think those things together to give a picture of Black life that may speak most primarily out of a particular North American context, but is not limited to and by that context.
So I'm to speak about blue. So the blue in the Blue Beautiful World is specifically meant to focus our attention on how our planet looks from the outside, how it looks from space. And we're often fixated on the land. We're often fixated on ourselves as humans and what's happening with landmass and so forth. And I wanted us to look at our oceans. I wanted us to look at what is, in fact, the majority of the Earth's surface, the water. And when I say look at the oceans, my bias, of course, as an islander as well, is to feel that connection to the ocean even when I don't go to the beach for years. And feel that connection even in the salt blood in our veins and the salt water of the ocean and so forth. So the story itself is indeed about outsiders looking at Earth, not just looking at us humans, but also asking the question, where's the intelligences of the oceans? What does it mean to have a planet that you don't think of as just yours to live in and to use or to exploit or whatever, but a planet that you are in fact sharing with other entities and that you have a responsibility for, because it's not just you that lives there. So the blue was meant to decenter humanity just a little bit, just enough for us to consider that there might be more to existence than just our existence.
So it makes me think of my work in What Storm with Thunder, which is also about the 2010 earthquake, and how I wanted to have an ongoing conversation about water in terms of who has access to water, who is denied access to water, and how devastating that is on an island to not have access to potable water and drinking water. But the harvesting in Harvesting Haiti, and I was actually asked several times to change the title by the editors and publishers of that book, and I stuck to my guns. I was like, I will explain it in the introduction, but even after I did that, marketing came back, could you change the title? No. I'll tell you the reason why I didn't change it, because what is happening actually to Haiti and to Haitians is that labor is being extracted at extreme levels of, to the decimation of the physical body of the population, so individual and, globally. The reason Haiti's educational system has collapsed and why there is no growth in different sectors is because going back to 2004, when Aristide was forcibly removed from office, because he was trying to raise the minimum wage and was told no by the United States, and also trying to get reparations from France, reparations that are now, as of a couple of days ago, estimated at $100 billion US, so absorb that. Haiti is positioned in the global economy to serve only for extraction. So labor is one thing, and resources are another, because it is a mineral-rich country. There are reports in the last month that mountains, so Haiti means land of the mountains, there are mountains that are collapsing in the interior of Haiti because of over-mining. 2 weeks after the earthquake, absorb this as well, 2 weeks after the earthquake, the Dominican Republic and Canada scrambled to acquire rights, mining rights, to all kinds of resources in Haiti. So what is happening? It's a harvesting. It's a taking of all that Haiti could possibly be offering to make it appear as if Haiti is poor, but in fact is extremely rich in natural resources, culturally, artistically. But if you deprive a people of their own resources, the fruits of their labor, then then you are on the way to extreme collapse. So I wanted the title, Harvesting Haiti, to describe or to at least encapsulate this idea. And since we've been invoking Gaza, it's also hinged on the work of Jasbir Puar and the idea of slow death and the maiming of people, where she talks about disability studies and how we need to rethink disability in the global south, because the global south is experiencing much more disability because of climate change, pollution, etc., and that a slow death is what is wanted for populations of the global south as they are being impoverished in various kinds of ways, but especially at the physical level. So that's what I was getting at with that title.
No, I'm really glad you didn't change the title. And I would just add to the slow deaths, the humanities scholar Rob Nixon talks about slow violence, which is like the long ecological collapse, that it is humans and more than humans, the planet indeed, as Karen pointed out in her book, that is under threat. So just letting you know, I'm going to ask 2 more questions because I'm sure there's lots of questions from the audience. We do have until about 12:45, I'm told, so I'm not being selfish. I'm just going to ask 2 more questions. So, Karen, and I'm glad you actually opened with that particular passage, and there was a particular description very early that you read just now of, quote, the manic optimism of incompetent politicians, I love that, end quote, in the face of planetary collapse. You're completely right. This does not sound like fiction at all when we survey our world, including the political class right across this Caribbean, and I will go on record to say there are no exceptions. And, they riffing a bit on Ruha Benjamin, who gave an amazing commencement address at Spelman College last week. So just riffing slightly to add Brown in, she says, black and brown faces in high places will not save us when they are conscripted to reproduce the status quo. Across all of your books, there is a critique of this kind of violent sovereign will to power that seeks domination, enclosure, even when we think about the prophet who then becomes re-scripted as the savior, the incarnate savior of us all. A will to power that elevates the individual hero or heroine. And in the Caribbean, we love a hero and a heroine. So, but at the same time, it seems to me that you all also offer alternative grammars and infrastructures of connection. Karen, you have a quote, all roads that do not lead to destruction lead to us in communion. Christina, in one of your notes, and it to me was one of the most beautiful notes for me, the chorus opens the way, speaking of Debbie Africa. And Myriam, I was thinking particularly of your columns and also what you storied there, thinking about these transnational Pan-African itineraries that Haiti opens for all of us. But you also encourage, it seems to me, a vision of Caribbeanness that is that is both regional but not bound to a deeply flawed notion of national sovereignty that resides in this institutional structure that we call CARICOM, or the Trinis call CARIGON. And I remember, I think it was a year after your columns, there was a young blood from Trinidad, Jabari Fraser, who did an incredible series, the Trinis might remember this, called Stateless in San Domingo, after the racist Supreme Court decision of the Dominican Republic. There was Juve IT, who was doing all of this work on the street support to Spain, performing like ICU care on the CARICOM patient. There was young women in Groundation, Grenada organizing. There was activists, including Andaye in Guyana, gathering signatures. And so it seems to me that you were offering this kind of infrastructure from below of regionalism. So I wondered if all of you might speak to the way in which you handle this question of power. It's the line from, there's a novel by Bessie Head, both of those dimensions in your work. Shall I start?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was very acutely aware of Jouvai, and when I was here in Trinidad in 2012, around that time, I was taught by Eintu Springer and Raul Gibbons, about the 70s revolution and the importance of Haiti to, revolutionary thinking in Trinidad and Tobago. And some of what they've talked to me about and some of the things that I learned from them had to do with a concept that I recognize from Haiti, which is called the combite, which speaks to, the quote that you have from Karen about the communal. And I will also speak the name of Jean Casimir, who's a sociologist who writes history, and he has a book called The Haitians, which has just been translated into English, where he retraces the history of an kind of unrecognized Haiti, a shadow Haiti, and moving away from Toussaint Louverture and Pétion, Christophe, all the big names of the revolution, to say these were not the people who created Haiti, actually. The people who created Haiti were the formerly enslaved, the free people, the non-elites. And they use the model of the combite, which is an idea that goes back to the lacou, the yard concept of the African village, to work together towards the greater good. And this is still very active in Haiti. So when people ask local grassroots organizers what is possible for Haiti of the future, they say, well, we're not having a problem, because in our village, our town, we have a combite, and in the combite we do this, and that, so just come and talk to the combite, It's not about going to the capital and talking to people in parliament, even though obviously we need those infrastructures, we need to be able to elect our own officials, who will represent us well, right? But there is a shadow world, which is very active in making sure that the average person can continue and prosper in Haiti. And I think, so I would ask everybody to read The Haitians and learn that other history, and perhaps to see how it's continuing to ripple through the country today.
I always say that it's a mistake to ask me about how my books deal with power, because that's far long an answer.
You kind of got this question yesterday.
I did, but I'm gonna put a different spin on it. I'm not going to address how my books deal with it, because my book includes some fantastical elements which can't be applied to reality. But what I will do is try to translate that element to the reality, and I do believe that one of the answers to power, or the misuse of power, is a better understanding of transcendence. What do I mean by transcendence? I don't mean simply like a feeling, like, you're in ecstasy or you're in flow or whatever. I mean literally the state of understanding that you can be beyond yourself, reach beyond yourself, whether that's about being in communion with another entity or in communion with the divine, just a way of going beyond the boundaries of self. That's what I try to put into my book, and in many ways the very pragmatic, practical applications that we see of different forms of government are precisely about encouraging people to make those kind of connections beyond the self, beyond the small group, beyond trying to just benefit either themselves or their families or their ethnicity or whatever that may be. Always, always looking beyond.
Thank you. Well, you ended with Bessie Head, which you may not know about me, is that I started graduate school thinking I was going to write a dissertation on Bessie Head, and so that I ended up writing a senior thesis on Bessie Head and a chapter of my dissertation and a chapter of my first book around Bessie Head. And so I read everything about Head, but one of the things she says, and I don't remember in which book now, is that what she did not want to see were the black and brown and, quote, colored faces replacing the faces of the white people in power, wielding terror. And so I think if I extend that to my own work, that it is very much that critique of, people like Barack Obama, or, many other black people in power, as you said, I could say Mia Motley, or any people in power who continue the same kinds of neoliberal or worse than neoliberal policies. So I think, again, I think that one of the things in both, I guess across all of my work, is thinking about the ways that what it means to be, a black person in the world, knowing that you may have no state to protect you anywhere. And how does that direct the ways that you act? How does that direct the kinds of risks you might take in relation to someone else, for someone else. How does it direct how one moves in the world, how one understands their vulnerability, and what that might allow in terms of imagining a different set of relations in which we all might have something like enough, and that there is no nation state to protect you, and that that these nation states enact violence again and again. And so that's, I think, one of the ways that I try to think about power. And there's another sort of small example. I have a note in which I quote Zakiya Iman Jackson. Those sort of terms like Black excellence, and say that Black excellence doesn't do the kind of work that you think it does. Black excellence is the answer to a racist question. So the ways that these kinds of framings that we imagine are doing a kind of liberating work simply collapse into a kind of answer to anti-Blackness and actually reanimate it. So thank you.
The late Trinidadian economist Lloyd Best talks about the difference between a real change, and an exchange, right?
Oh, can I? I mean, it makes me think of that moment in The Bluest Eye where, Claudia, if any of you've read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, Claudia starts out hating the white baby doll, and then she comes to love it, and she says that is adjustment without improvement.
Absolutely. And then we come to internalize this white gaze and enact lateral violence against each other. I could go on about this all day in the context of the Caribbean. I'm from Guyana. But yeah, and then Lloyd also talks about, in independent thought and West Indian freedom, we need a Caribbean susu, right? Which again is trying to language a practice that Dion talked about, practice this morning, or Ruthie Gilmore's rehearsal of these infrastructures that engage land, that relate to our indigenous communities that frankly we haven't really talked about centrally in the Caribbean until fairly recently, that these are the kinds of things we want. I'm going to open it to questions, but I have one last quick question, starting with Karen, and then I promise, we still have half an hour, so you don't vex at me. And it's because Jackie, who is kind of like my mentor, is here. There was a fourth question Jackie asked in that interview with Gina Ulysses, which is who walks with you? And so I wondered if, I can think, and one gets very emotional when one thinks about these things, what does ancestor mean to you? And who walks with you in relation to all of these? Ancestor, who walks with you? Because I picked it up in all of your books, but I'm curious to hear how you language that. And then it's over to you.
Do you know, when you ask who walks with me, I actually, for some reason, first thought about the land. Because it's not just, ancestry to me sometimes is not just about humans, it's about the connection that the act of living on a land, those kind of connections, those kind of bonds can create. And I say this carefully because there are some of us who are landless, countryless, in diaspora, and I'm not excluding that. But what I think it means to me in a way is that your ancestors has almost created a ghost on the land, and it's almost the ghost of that, I think, that follows me. So that even when I am overseas, even when I am writing a fantastical world, there is somehow the ghost of something that I think of as not just Barbados, but of how that island came into being and who lived there and who suffered there and who strived there and who just was, creating a life and a sense of being there. And all of that is kind of walking with me or whispering in my ear or pointing me towards certain aspects of story. And sometimes, and this is the bit that I love, I will go to a place I've never seen before and I'll be like, oh my goodness, I feel that click. I've not been here, as far as I know, maybe even my ancestors haven't been here, but I feel this call of the land to me. So like Glasgow, Malta, odd places where it's just like, why do I have this sense of almost like blessed earth? I think any place where people have lived and have loved in that place gives you that feel and that sense and that inspiration.
this is, I heard you. Okay, Jackie, you still yourself. So it's a deep question, and I'll answer it as briefly as possible in a couple of ways. Related to what Karen is saying, it made me immediately think of, because you invoked also a list of statelessness of Dominicans of Haitian descent who've been denationalized since September 2013 in the DR. Going back to 1929, let's be specific, when there was a border dispute between the two countries. And so it is something to be stateless in your own country and to be prevented from leaving it because you have no papers or your papers have been destroyed. And so I'm thinking about a concept that I've developed over time in one of my academic works, which is Laku consciousness, and the idea that we are now living in a time where the idea of a yard and the land that we come from is virtual, but that we have a lot of retention, from the continent, from the African continent, to our islands and elsewhere, wherever we might have been dispersed. And that is ancestral knowledge that is descended to us. If there is a through line through my work from the academic to the creative, is that I work for the dead, and that I have been very conscious of that. And it also why sometimes, for example, the essays came first on the 2010 earthquake, and then the novel came later, because working with the dead takes time. And what that means is that I feel a great responsibility to do the best I can at any specific time that I am working on a particular project to articulate what the dead speak through me as well as I can. And it obviously depends on my age and where I am in life, how well I do that. But I would also say, there's something that happens to me in different geographies, which is that, and I'm sure it's happened to many of you, is that sometimes a very elderly person of African descent who sometimes is unhoused will ask for money, will ask for something. And something happens, it's like something vibrates in me and I must respond. And often they're speaking directly to you or to me, and I respond, with some offering of whatever I can. And my partner, who's Brazilian, so because this has happened to me over time in Cuba, in the DR, it happened to me in Washington, D.C. last weekend. And often, people brush such people off. Well, why, and I try to respond, have a conversation, exchange. And my partner told me, whenever this is happening to you, this is a Shu. This is a Shu who has come to you and is opening the doors and asking you to respond. And so there are my ancestors, but there are other ancestors, and they come to us in different forms, in different ways, and we must find it within ourselves to respond in a way that is up to the task. So often we have certain privileges and we think that we know better, because we have an education or we can circulate, but often the most humble among us know far more and are much more connected to the spirit world than we are, and the work is to do that work of translation between worlds.
Well, I think my answer is going to be short, which is both, there are people in this room who walk with me, there are the living and the dead, people I know and don't know. My first thought was, 60 million and more. So I think there are books that walk with me. There are songs that walk with me. There are ideas that I've worried that walk with me. But I also try to be responsible to those who have come before me, to those who have survived and those who haven't survived.
We'll open it up to questions.
Hi, good afternoon. No, I'm just telling the young person with the mic next. You
Cool.
go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I want to open by thanking Alissa for highlighting Rifat Alarir, who immediately strikes me as a kind of touchstone for the kinds of conversations that you're having. I think of him and I think of Mossab Abu Toha, another Palestinian poet who was arrested and beaten by Israeli officers. And that immediately struck to me a kind of touchstone to Walter Rodney's assassination in the 80s, and this kind of radical notion that the power of the word has such a radical influence that it is fearsome and that there are forces that are working to destroy it. And that the work that we have as creators is to use that word in that radical sense. And I guess the question that I have for you all is, what do you see as the radical goal of your work to educate, to inspire, and what do you think is the ideal reader in that sense to get that fire from that work?
What a great question. I always say that I'm writing back to my 14-year-old self who didn't have access or didn't know what to access, which books to access. And so I imagine there are lots of 14-year-olds running around who need the work that I'm producing the way my 14-year-old self needed In Search of My Mother's Gardens by Alice Walker, or Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, or who had already read Maurice Leroy, the first Haitian Creole poet. So there is not really an ideal reader, because I think most of my work exists both for that person who is searching for what I'm producing, but is also existing to challenge those readers who are not expecting what they're going to get in my work from a Haitian writer, that will upset what they think is Haitian history, what they think is Haitian culture, what they think is Haitian identity. And so I don't want to repeat the old narratives. I want to bring in new narratives that will expand the vision of a reader when they think about Haiti from that moment forward.
Brandon, as usual, coming with questions. Myriam said something earlier that was fascinating to me, talking about when you are as a writer approaching a project or a work, the age you're at can influence how you deal with it, how well you deal with it. And similarly, as a reader, there definitely have been books that I have encountered that I did not get at the time, that I got a lot better when I was older. One of the things I have learned to love is the kind of book that you can pick up at any various points of your life, and it's like a fresh book. It's teaching you new things. And there is an aspect of the creation of a work where I know what I'm doing, but I can also go back to a book I wrote 3 years earlier and go, oh, wow, okay, now I see what I was doing there. And that's what I want both for myself and for the reader. Let this book be a kind of a lifelong journey. Let's come back to it. Let's ruminate on it. Let it have conversations with us through different ages and stages of our lives. And let us always be evolving in our thought, in our perceptions, in our worldviews, because nothing is ever static. And the discovery is where the glory is.
I think that in some way each of the books that I've written has been written out of a sense of urgency. And so I would also say that each of my books has been written with, and more so the In the Wake and Ordinary Notes, with primarily a Black audience in mind. But that doesn't mean that that my books are only for a Black audience. I would like them to be read by whoever is open to reading them. But they have been written with a sense of urgency about what we face and how we might face it, and what kinds of worlds we might make, and what language helps us do toward making those kinds of relations that we want to live in, and toward unmaking the ones that enclose us.
Yeah, I'm sitting here being just tremendously moved by this occurrence, especially as it has followed the earlier discussion. in which I felt Toni Morrison's presence in a very strong way. I'm feeling that this must be what heaven is like. A kind of brilliance and light and generosity and love and care and devotion. I mean, I'm trembling inside because of what you all have offered us. And I had a sense from this morning's conversation that there is a profound kind of transformation that happens when you take on the genealogies of work that your work collectively and individually have gifted us. And particularly this morning in Dion's conversation, I also felt that there is perhaps a different kind of space on the inside that is fundamentally rewired in a way. There's a rewiring that happens on the inside that allows, not without struggle, but that allows something to happen that is different from the ordinary. Or perhaps the ordinary is always extraordinary in the way in which you have shown us, Christina. Or the blue, the indigo that we grew and color ourselves with. Or the things we need to harvest necessarily because we must. I don't know why I feel that I just want to weep right now. So I'm wondering if you recognize anything from what I'm saying about the cultivation, the disciplined and expansive cultivation of some inside place that can be recognized as transformation, that can be recognized as this rewiring that you might reflect upon for us.
I'm going to be brief because that was just a stunning thing that was just said just now, and I just need to sit with it. But when you talk about the transformative inner space, all I can say is that for myself, I think I began to feel I was progressing to being a better writer when I allowed my stories to break me and remake me. When I allowed myself to write things that I thought I couldn't write because they were too painful. Went away and recovered, but still went back and was true to the story. So when you talk about that inner transformative space, the name I put to it now, or maybe a different name later on, is a space that allows me to profoundly engage with truth, whatever truth may be, and understand it and accept it and allow it to transform me, and accept that it's not always going to be something that I like or something that seems to be kind to me, but that it is real, and touching the real is what even fiction can do for you.
So, thank you for those words, Jackie, and I'm going to keep thinking about them for the days. You know, as a Haitian writer, one of the things that I'm compelled to do, especially in my creative writing, is to talk about the healing practices of voodoo. And earlier I talked about Eshu materializing in profane space and calling upon us to respond. And Eshu Legba is the person who opens up the ways, right? Opens up the ability for us to be in two dimensions at once, which makes me think of your work, Karen. And so for me, that interior space that I try to cultivate is one that is very culturally significant for me. And it is what renews me and allows me to do my work, so that I'm constantly in a conversation with something greater than myself, which also speaks to this idea of transcendence, but in a very Haitian/African sensibility of understanding that I'm only a gateway to try to speak these truths into being through my work. So I think that's all I can say about it, but yeah.
Thank you, Jackie, for those. My microphone's not on. Is it on now? On. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for those generous comments. And I think that it's one of the notes that Alissa brought up. But I think how I want to answer, because I too will still be thinking about what you've said. I think what I want to answer is that one of the things that I wanted the movement in this book to do was to move from the kind of singular note, authored by me, to a kind of chorus, which is why I invited people to write for the dictionary and to sort of make clear that none of the thinking that we do is alone. So it also ties back to the question of who walks with you. Everybody who I mention in that book walks with me. They walk with me all the time in certain ways, right? So all the texts that I reference, the things that I've read that have made some kind of mark on me. And so I think that the kind of transformation is to really put on the page as well that we work with a chorus, and that opens up something, that you don't have to be tied to the kind of idea of intellectual property in certain ways, right? That you are always we are working together towards something. We arrive at things together. They can, and those ideas, the kind of authors of those ideas go with you as well. So I think that's one of the things that was really kind of wonderful about sort of moving through the writing of this and thinking about, what that kind of collective work could possibly do, that kind of choral work, which comes from Saidiya, right? The chorus opens the way.
Thank you. I unfortunately, yes, 5 minutes, a little more than 5, because I want to give the authors the last word, and they've promised me we have 2 readings of 1 to 2 minutes, and Karen is about 3 to 4. So I'm going to ask them to close us out. I've asked them to offer a very short reading of something yet to come, something we anticipate even if we cannot name. And as you are deciding who to get up, and are you going to go up to the podium? I just wanted to say, in response to Jackie very quickly, in a small short film done by the Barbadian filmmaker Annalie Davis, Wendell Manwaran from Three Canals says, the bars aren't there, they're in here, they're in here. This is the work we have to do. So we might think of this panel in closing as quarreling with the history with a capital H, and asking ourselves, you gave us issue. For all of us, when the ancestors come, have you cleared the space? Have you done the work? Are you ready to receive them? So with that, I'm going to ask you to offer your final reading, and thank you very, very much.
So I'm just going to read a paragraph from another essay from Harvesting Haiti called What Dreams Are Made Of, Haiti Campé, also from 2012. And this is not to say that people are dreamless, but to offer a sort of opening conversation about what we owe people in Haiti. A week ago today, I sat in Sivadié, on the outskirts of Jacmel in southern Haiti, and listened to Gerda Constant tell me the story of her ad hoc work for rural youth, work she does in addition to her full-time occupation working with NGOs. I listened to her telling me of how she speaks with young Haitians, especially in rural areas, hoping to raise in them an awareness of their own gifts, of the beauty of their country, despite all evidence to the contrary. Gerda told me the story of one little girl gifted with a beautiful singing voice. She asked the girl what her dream was, and the girl responded that she had none. Gerda pressed her, asking her what she thought of when she let loose with her friends, what she wondered about. The girl responded that she did not wonder about anything. And when you are alone, Gerda asked, what do you think about? And the girl answered that she did not think about anything in particular, but that occasionally, when a day or two had gone by and she had not eaten, she would make her way to the side of a river running close to her home, find a spot and sing there alone until she felt better, until the pangs of hunger left her and the song lifted her beyond pain and despair. This gift, this song, Gerda asked, thinking of a long history of Haitian troubadours, don't you dream of doing something with it, of singing for others? No, the girl answered, here I can't afford to dream. Gerda is one of the many Haitians working to restore the capacity to dream and to hope to the youth of Haiti. But we may well wonder what it means when a generation of children cannot dare to dream, refuses to dream, because they have already seen too much or too little to warrant what must strike them as reckless optimism.
This is an addition to, you'll find it at the back of the Galaxy game, which is the book just before The Blue Beautiful World, but I'm afraid that you get it with no context again. We don't have time for that. But it's called A Time Traveler Addresses His Apprentice. You will find that time is a drug. Take it long enough and you will begin to build up a resistance. Take it long enough and you will begin to develop an addiction. You will tell yourself, one more trip, just one more, because of course this time will be the particular set of circumstances and battery of choices that will lead to the desired outcome. You will become a dilettante in some areas, a connoisseur in others. That dynasty you track for 8 generations, dipping in and out of their lives for a day or two at a time. That stranger you meet and live with for 3 entire years of ordinary time, your extended vacation from the burden of eternity. Which will you know better, the dynasty or the stranger? Same snapshot, different angle of view, different resolution. You will not find answers, only examples. The dynasty you fall in love with, the stranger remains a stranger. You will try to pace yourself and allow your mind to recover from each sojourn. Eventually, nothing will work. You will see it all and recognize that there is yet more all to see. You will become exhausted by apocalyptic wastelands and bored by utopias. Unused potential will frustrate you with the agony of fruit hanging just out of reach. Lack of potential will frustrate you with the futility of a desert without oases. Brief victories become more painful than long generations of unrelenting oppression. That desired outcome can be so close, so tantalizingly near, so present, and then gone, worse than if it had never been. You will have it, and you will never be able to keep it. You will try despair. You will attempt destruction. You plot to assassinate your own grandfathers, and when that fails, you will realize at last that you can never visit the past or future of your own timeline. Nothing that you do can make a difference to your universe. Something cracks in your brain and your heart. You spend fruitless millennia trying to exterminate the evolutionary ancestor of your entire species. You almost desire to obliterate your planet. But that scares you sober, because you finally remember that it was the destruction of your world that brought you to this state, an apprentice time traveler seeking to undo the grief of your myriad kin. You will try suicide first before you try any of these things, but the universe will protect you. It will not allow you to destroy yourself, not directly, not by proxy. You are not mine to destroy, it tells you. You must return to your own timeline for that. After the addiction, after the crash, rehabilitation. You will start humbly, allowing random chance to navigate your course. You will become an observer, not an actor, and thus you will learn you are a grain of sand, an alien particle barely tolerated by an environment that is not your home. You may achieve some small effect, a scratch on the impermeable stone of destiny, but the universe will slowly move to erase any change that it does not sanction. You will discover that there is a game being played and you are not and will never be a player. You are far too small to sit at this table. The miracle is that you're even allowed to watch. When you have learned enough, you may be permitted the honor of becoming a pawn. But such a pawn. Awake, aware of the game and the other slumbering pieces and the long, complex strategies that unfold over time and space. You will learn to sing and say, I am a brief and beautiful note in a larger song. And you will truly understand that this is no tragedy. This is the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. This is the song of creation, the thrum of existence. You will find peace. You will be ready to return. You will speak this poem to the next apprentice.
I will read 2 short notes to end. Note 234. Care is complicated, gendered, misused. It is often mobilized to enact violence, not assuage it, yet I cannot surrender it. I want acts and accounts of care as shared and distributed risk, as mass refusals of the unbearable life, as total rejections of the dead future. And then note 246. What is required of us now in this long time of our undoing?
The rhythm of the responses was just beautiful. Thank you so much.